The night the prophecy awakened felt like the world tore open just to swallow her name. Shadows curled around Alara as if they recognized her before she ever understood why. And even the wind trembled as if carrying a secret meant to ruin her life. What if the child inside her wasn't a blessing, but a warning? What if her sister's death had never been an ending, but the spark of something far more dangerous? And why did the moon whisper Kale's name in a way that made her heart falter with both fear and longing? She stood in the ancient hall, waiting for a marriage born of duty, not love, tasting the weight of fate on her tongue. As torches flickered like restless spirits, she wondered what burns brighter, destiny or forbidden desire, and whether Kale would ever see her as anything but the shadow of the woman he lost. The ceremony ended, but the silence between them felt louder than any vow spoken under stone and fire. Alara followed Kale through the torchlit corridor, her footsteps soft against the cold floor, wondering if he could hear the wild rhythm of her heart. He walked ahead with the stiff posture of a man carrying grief like armor, never slowing, never turning. Yet she sensed the storm inside him. Every doorway they passed whispered memories of Saren, and Alara felt them wrapping around her throat like vines she could never cut free. She wanted to speak, to ease the ache living in the space between them, but the weight of duty pressed against her chest. She wondered how you build trust with someone who still loves a ghost. Kale paused at the threshold of their shared chamber, and for a heartbeat, Alara felt the world tilt under the weight of what they had become. Two strangers bound by a promise neither asked for. She watched him set aside his armor with hands that looked steady, though she sensed the tremor of old wounds beneath the surface. The room smelled of cedar and cold night air, a reminder that this was his space, and she was the intruder. Her voice remained trapped in her throat, tangled with memories of Saren's gentle laugh that still clung to the walls. She wondered if Kale saw her as a cruel reminder or an unwelcome replacement. The silence between them finally cracked when Kale asked whether she was ready to take on the responsibility of being his wife in name only. His voice was soft, not unkind, but edged with uncertainty. Alara nodded, though the gesture felt fragile. She didn't crave possession or passion. She only wished for understanding. As moonlight filtered through the window and painted the room in silver, she felt the first ripple of something alive inside her. Warm, bright, impossible. She gasped before she could hide it, and Kale turned sharply, sensing the shift. She prayed he hadn't seen the flicker of fear in her eyes. Alara lay awake long after Kale drifted into restless sleep, staring at the ceiling as that strange warmth deepened inside her. It wasn't pain. It wasn't normal either. It pulsed like a heartbeat that didn't belong to her. She pressed a hand against her stomach, trembling at the realization that something ancient was stirring. Saren's death, the rushed marriage, the prophecy whispered by the oracle. Suddenly, it all began to pull together like threads tightening into a noose. She feared the truth would break Kale in a way she could never mend, yet the secret growing within her refused to be silent. She wondered how you protect a man from a destiny he was never meant to escape. Morning light crept across the room like it feared waking the fragile peace between them. Kale stood near the window, shoulders tense, eyes locked on Alara with a wary curiosity. He didn't bother hiding anymore. She felt his questions pressing against her skin, silent but sharp. And every breath she took seemed to deepen his suspicion. He wasn't cruel, but grief had carved too many shadows inside him. And now everything about her felt like another unanswered riddle. When her magic flared again, a soft pulse under her ribs, she flinched. Kale noticed! His jaw tightened, and the distance between them suddenly felt too small for all the truths she could never explain. She wondered if this was how trust died, not with betrayal, but with fear of the truth. Kale approached her slowly, as if nearing a wounded creature that might bolt at the smallest sound. His voice was quiet when he asked if she was unwell, yet she felt the weight beneath the words. He wanted answers she didn't have. She tried to steady her breath, but the warmth inside her pulsed again, stronger than before. His eyes narrowed, confusion and fear warring across his face. Their marriage had barely begun, and already the fragile thread between them strained under secrets she wished she could bury. She whispered that she was fine, but the lie tasted bitter. Cale stepped back, that single movement carving a fault line between them that felt impossible to cross. By midday, the council summoned Cale, demanding to know why the runes recorded an unexplained surge of magic within his household. Ilara followed him into the grand hall, her heart pounding as ancient eyes turned toward her. Whispers curled through the air like smoke, thick with suspicion and fear. Cale stood tall, but she sensed the growing turmoil beneath his calm exterior. When the High Counselor asked whether Ilara carried a child, her breath caught. Cale froze. The hall seemed to collapse in on itself. She felt the warmth inside her ignite with a life of its own, and in that moment she understood. The kingdom already saw her as a threat, even before she knew what she carried. Later, outside the hall, Cale demanded the truth. His voice shook with a mix of fear, anger, and something softer he didn't dare name. Ilara felt the question before he spoke it aloud. How could she be pregnant when they had never been truly husband and wife? She tried to speak, but words tangled in panic. The warmth inside her thrummed like a drum beat from another world. Cale's disbelief carved deep lines across his face, and she watched something inside him crack. She told him she didn't know how it happened. The look he gave her then felt like a blade, lined with sorrow. As dusk settled over the fortress, Ilara found herself drawn to the place where Siren once prayed. An abandoned chamber filled with fading murals and forgotten incense. The air hummed with an ancient presence that felt older than the kingdom itself. She knelt, desperate for guidance, when a chill swept through the room and the shadows shifted like they were breathing. A voice she recognized yet feared echoed around her, belonging to the Oracle of Ashfall. The seer stepped forward, eyes burning like dying embers. She told Ilara. The truth was not hers to control. The child within her was not conceived by mortal means. It was placed there by a force that had chosen her long before Cale ever looked her way. Ilara's breath shattered in her chest. She knew Cale would never be ready for this truth. Night settled over the fortress like a cloak woven from memory and regret. Cale sat alone beside the dying hearth fire, Saren's name echoing through his mind as if summoned by every flicker of flame. Ilara's strange warmth, the Oracle's warning, the Council's suspicion. Everything twisted into a storm he could no longer outrun. He reached for Saren's old keepsake box, the one he hadn't opened since the night she died. His hands trembled. Inside lay her journal, bound in worn leather and stained by time. He hesitated before turning the first page, afraid of what he might find, afraid of what truths might reshape everything he believed about the woman he once loved, and the one he was now bound to. Ilara moved silently through the corridor, drawn toward the faint scent of cedar drifting from Cale's chamber. She paused at the doorway, watching him bend over the journal with the kind of broken longing she wasn't meant to witness. The sight pierced her more deeply than any accusation he had thrown her way. She stepped inside, unsure if her presence was welcome. He didn't look up. Instead, he whispered Saren's name under his breath as though afraid it might vanish if spoken too loudly. Ilara's heart twisted. She wasn't jealous of Saren's memory, only terrified that she would never be seen as anything other than her sister's shadow. As Cale turned another page, his breath caught. Saren's handwriting trembled with fear he had never seen in her eyes. She wrote of a prophecy older than the kingdom, one tied not to her, but to Ilara. She confessed she had seen visions of Ilara surrounded by light and fire, carrying a child not born of flesh, but of celestial power. Saren feared the prophecy, but believed Ilara would one day save them all. The words shattered Cale's understanding of everything he thought he knew. Guilt collided with confusion, and for the first time, he He wondered whether he had failed both sisters in different ways. Before Cale could speak, a violent shudder ran through the castle walls. Elara gasped as a roar echoed from the courtyard, deep and wild. Cale rose instantly, instinct sharpening every movement. They rushed toward the source as shadows slithered across the stone like living smoke. At the gates, a creature from the old legends, a night-born hunter, crouched low, its eyes burning with hunger. It wasn't here for Cale. It wasn't here for revenge. It was here for her, and for the child she carried. Cale didn't hesitate. For the first time since Saren's death, he stepped between Elara and danger without question. The creature lunged, and the world erupted into chaos. Cale drew his blade with the ease of a man who had lived too long in battle, meeting the beast's fury head-on. Elara felt her heart hammering as the pulse inside her chest flared like fire, responding to the danger with a force she didn't understand. Cale fought with brutal grace, each strike echoing with the will to protect something he didn't yet trust. When the beast lunged for her, Elara threw up her hands in pure instinct, and a burst of blinding light exploded from her palms. The creature reeled back, howling as its shadow burned away. Cale turned, stunned, staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. In that moment, fear and wonder intertwined between them, binding their fates tighter than any vow ever could. The courtyard settled into a heavy stillness after the creature vanished into smoke, leaving only the echo of its roar hanging in the cold night air. Cale stared at Elara as though the ground beneath him had shifted, forcing him to reconsider everything he believed about her. She felt exposed under his gaze, not because of fear, but because for the first time he wasn't looking through her. He was truly seeing her. Her palms still tingled with fading light, and the warmth in her belly fluttered like a heartbeat made of fire. She whispered that she didn't know how she did it. Cale stepped closer, his expression torn between awe and dread. The truth glimmered between them, fragile and electric. This power wasn't an accident, and neither was what grew inside her. Inside the war room, torches hissed against the damp air as Cale demanded answers from the Oracle, who had arrived in unsettling silence. The seer looked at Elara with a mixture of pity and reverence that made Cale's grip tighten around the edge of the table. Elara stood still as the Oracle spoke of ancient fire, choosing a vessel of celestial power, seeking a mother strong enough to carry it. None of it made sense, not to Elara, not to Cale, and maybe not even to the Oracle herself. When Cale asked whether the child was truly hers, the Oracle's gaze dimmed. The pause before she answered told them everything. Elara felt her world tilt as the truth crawled into the open. The life inside her belonged to fate, not blood. Cale's expression cracked open with disbelief as the Oracle revealed the rest. The child inside Elara was shaped from the remnants of Saren's dying magic and the ancient flame that once protected the kingdom. Elara felt the words like a blade sliding beneath her ribs. Saren's magic. Saren's final breath. Her sister's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was the beginning of this impossible life now tied to her own. Cale stumbled back, horror and grief clashing in his eyes. For him, this wasn't just a prophecy fulfilled. It was Saren's ghost reaching into the present. Elara tried to speak, but her voice broke. She hadn't stolen Saren's legacy. She had been chosen by something too powerful to refuse. After the Oracle left, the room collapsed into suffocating silence. Cale finally looked at Elara, but the softness he had shown in the courtyard was gone. In its place stood a man battling ghosts. He accused her of knowing, of hiding, of letting him believe she was caught in fate when she might have been part of it all along. She shook her head violently, pleading for him to understand she had been just as lost, but grief made him blind. His voice cracked with Saren's name, the sound laced with anguish he couldn't bury. Elara felt her heart shatter under the weight of a pain she could never heal. She whispered that she never wanted to replace Saren, only to survive her own story. Elara fled the chamber before her sobs could betray the last of her strength. She wandered through the cold corridors until she reached the old tower, where the wind keened like a mourning spirit. She stood at the highest window, staring at the dark horizon as the warmth inside her shifted into something urgent and protective. She wrapped both arms around her belly, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. She couldn't stay, not while Kale's heart was breaking under truths neither of them asked for. As the first storm clouds gathered overhead, she knew what she had to do. Leave before she destroyed the last piece of peace he had left. Even if running meant breaking her own heart. Kale searched the fortress long after Elara vanished into the storm. Every corner of the stone halls echoed with her absence, tightening around him like a vice. Rage simmered beneath his ribs, but it wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at himself. He had pushed her away when she needed him most. He had let grief blind him to the truth staring him in the face. Saren's magic, the prophecy, the impossible life growing inside Elara, none of it mattered compared to the simple, crushing realization that he didn't want her gone. He stepped into the courtyard just as thunder cracked overhead, and for the first time since Saren's death, fear, real fear, pulsed through him. Not of destiny, not of prophecy, but of losing Elara forever. Meanwhile, Elara walked through the northern forest, each step heavier than the last. The storm followed her like a wounded shadow, and the branches groaned above her, as if mourning her choice. She pressed a hand to her stomach, feeling the ember-like warmth pulse in soft waves, reminding her that she wasn't alone. Leaving Kale tore at something inside her, but staying would have destroyed them both. She whispered apologies to the child she carried, promising safety, even though she had no path, no shelter, no certainty. Her breath trembled in the cold air. She wondered if fate punished the wrong people, or if she was simply too weak to bear the weight placed upon her shoulders. Back at the fortress, Kale sought out the Oracle with a desperation that stripped away every layer of pride he had left. He demanded to know where Elara had gone, but the seer only closed her ember-red eyes and listened to a truth carried on the wind. She told him that Elara ran not from prophecy, but from the pain he inflicted. Her words hit him harder than any blade ever could. Kale felt something inside him fracture, a quiet, devastating clarity. He had spent so long clinging to Saren's memory that he hadn't noticed his heart beginning to shift toward the woman standing right beside him. The Oracle warned that dark forces hunted Elara, and that if he didn't move now, he would reach her too late. That single thought nearly brought him to his knees. As Elara reached the old river crossing, the air around her sharpened with a chilling stillness. She sensed it before she saw them, shadows slipping between the trees, hungry and patient. The Nightborn hunters had followed her. Her heart slammed against her ribs as one emerged, its eyes glowing with lethal intent. She stumbled back, clutching her abdomen, whispering to the child inside that she would not let anything touch them. The creature crept closer, muscles bunching as if savoring the moment. Elara raised her hands, praying for the light she had summoned before, but fear strangled her focus. The warmth inside her flickered like a dying flame, and she wondered if this was where her story ended. Just as the beast lunged, the forest split with the sound of a blade cutting through air. Kale crashed into the clearing like a storm-given form, his sword striking the creature with a fierce, desperate precision. Born from fear and love, he could no longer deny. Elara cried out his name, her voice breaking as if she had been holding it back for years. Kale moved with terrifying determination, driving the creature away from her with a final, brutal strike. When silence returned, he turned to her. Wet, breathless, shaken. She looked at him as though he were the miracle she never expected. Kale stepped closer, voice raw as he said he was done running from the truth. He wanted her. He wanted their impossible child, and he would fight the world to keep them both alive. Kale held Elara's trembling hands as the storm finally began to ease, but the fear inside them did not. The Nightborn's attack had shaken something loose, not just within the forest, but within their hearts. Ilara felt the warmth in her belly shifting with new urgency, a warning she couldn't decipher. Kale's eyes softened as he brushed rain from her cheeks, his touch gentler than she had ever known from him. He whispered that he wouldn't let her run again, not from him and not from the truth that had finally caught up to them. She wanted to believe him, to trust the change she saw, but destiny had never been kind to either of them. Still, in that fragile moment, standing in the ruins of fear and doubt, she felt a flicker of hope take root. They moved through the forest together, Kale refusing to let more than a breath of space come between them. Ilara leaned on him when the strange fire within her flared, each burst more intense than the last. She whispered that something was changing. The child was growing faster, responding to danger with its own ancient instinct. Kale tightened his arm around her, offering his strength without hesitation. The path ahead twisted through roots and shadows, yet for the first time, Ilara felt like she wasn't facing destiny alone. Kale's presence wrapped around her like a promise, steady and warm. She wondered if fate had chosen her not because she was strong enough, but because it knew someone would come who loved her enough to fight beside her. They reached the ruins of an ancient watchtower as dusk bled into night, its broken stones glowing faintly with celestial energy. Ilara felt drawn toward it, as though the flame inside her recognized its origin. Kale stayed close, blade ready, heart pounding in rhythm with her unsteady breaths. When she stepped into the circle of cracked stone, the air shifted, warm, bright, alive. A vision hit her with blinding force. She saw Saren reaching toward her, eyes full of sorrow and love, whispering that she was never meant to bear the burden alone. Ilara collapsed to her knees as the vision shattered, and Kale caught her just before she fell. She sobbed into his chest, realizing the truth. Saren's magic had chosen her not to replace her sister, but to complete what Saren could not. The ground trembled as a dark mist seeped between the ruined walls. Kale rose instantly, positioning himself between Ilara and the encroaching shadows. Shapes formed within the fog, more Nightborn hunters, drawn by the energy awakened inside her. Ilara tried to stand, but her body shook violently as the celestial fire surged. Kale's voice cut through the roar of rising power, urging her to breathe, to focus, to trust that she was stronger than the fear trying to break her. She reached inward, grasping for the warmth that had become both curse and comfort. It responded with a force that made her gasp. Light flickered at her fingertips. For the first time, she controlled it. The hunters charged. Light burst from Ilara like a star igniting, swirling into Kale's blade as he met the first creature with a strike that blazed brighter than fire. Together they fought, not as strangers bound by duty, but as two souls entwined by fate's harsh design. Ilara's power flowed through Kale, strengthening his every move, while his presence anchored her enough to keep the magic from consuming her. When the final beast fell, the ruins hummed with quiet victory. Kale dropped to his knees beside her, cupping her face with shaking hands. She whispered that she couldn't do this without him. He answered with a raw honesty that left her breathless. He didn't want her to. And in that moment, under the watchful gaze of the ancient stars, they chose each other over prophecy, over fear, over everything that once held them apart. The sky broke open in a cascade of silver as Ilara and Kale reached the heart of the ruins. The storm cloud spiraled into a glowing vortex, answering the pulse inside her with a force that nearly brought her to her knees. Kale held her steady, his arms strong around her as the ground trembled with ancient recognition. She felt the child within her stir, not with pain, but with purpose. The final moment was coming. She looked up at Kale, seeing fear and fierce devotion battling in his eyes. He whispered that he was here, no matter what destiny demanded. Ilara clung to his words as the air thickened with celestial fire. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. She felt chosen. Pain rippled through Alara as the fire inside her erupted, sending streaks of golden energy across the stones. Kale lowered her gently to the ground, his hands steady, even as the earth shook beneath them. She cried out, overwhelmed by the fierce power surging through her body. Kale whispered her name again and again, grounding her with the sound. The sky answered her agony with a blinding flash, and symbols, older than the kingdom, ignited around them in a glowing circle. Alara felt something break open inside her, a flood of warmth, life, and destiny intertwining. She screamed not in fear, but in transformation. The firestorm reached its peak, then quieted into a soft warmth that wrapped the ruins in a glow like sunrise. Alara's breath steadied, and she felt the weight of a newborn life settle into her arms. Tiny, warm, impossibly bright. The child's skin shimmered faintly with celestial light, the Emberborn. Tears blurred her vision as she held what destiny had fought so hard to create. Kale knelt beside her, his expression shattered open with awe and tenderness. He touched the child's cheek with trembling fingers, whispering that no prophecy could ever define them again. For the first time since Saren's death, peace softened his features. Alara felt something deeper than fate bind them together. The ruins settled into silence, broken only by the child's gentle breaths. The celestial glow faded, revealing the world with new clarity. The oracle approached through the thinning mist, her ember-red eyes softer than Alara had ever seen. She spoke of the prophecy's end not in destruction, but in renewal. Alara had rewritten the fate that once enslaved the kingdom. Kale helped her to her feet, supporting her tenderly as the oracle bowed, acknowledging Alara as the true heir of the ancient flame. Alara felt a strange calm wash over her. She was no longer the girl who lived in Saren's shadow. She was the wielder of something far greater. And she wasn't facing it alone. As dawn finally broke, Kale and Alara walked out of the ruins together, the Emberborn nestled safely in her arms. The rising sun painted the world gold, as if blessing their fragile new beginning. Kale brushed a kiss against Alara's forehead, a gesture filled with everything he once feared to feel. She leaned into him, her heart steady for the first time in years. Saren's memory drifted through her mind, but it no longer brought pain, only gratitude. She whispered a quiet goodbye to the sister who had started this journey, and a soft hello to the life that would shape their future. Together they stepped into the light, no longer bound by fate, but guided by love they had earned through fire.